Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Code. In today's video, we're going to create this counter project. It's very simple. Whenever we click on this angle up arrow, we add one number to our counter. Whenever we click on this angle down arrow, we subtract one number from our counter. And also the background color of our counter changes depending on the value of our counter. So if it's a positive number, it changes to green. If it's a negative number, it changes to red. If it's 0, it's black. So this is what we're going to make. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead and open VS Code and Google Chrome on your computer. In VS Code, go ahead and navigate to your project folder. If you don't have one, that's totally okay. You can go ahead and create a new one. I'm going to create a new folder and call it counter. Go ahead and select that folder. And this takes us back to VS Code. In our project folder, we need to create 3 files. So we need an HTML file, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file. I'm going to call the HTML file index.html. And let's name our CSS style.css. And we can call our JavaScript file script.js. Now let's go ahead and go to our index.html file. Click at the beginning and type exclamation point followed by the tab key on your keyboard, and this generates a basic HTML template to work with. Change the title of our page to counter. Let's go ahead and link our CSS link and then tab, and we called our CSS file style.css. Let's go to the body and also do the same to our script. So script, choose the one with the source, and we named our JavaScript file script.js. And we also need to link font awesome since we're going to use that, and we need these arrows in our project, and these are font awesome icons. So let's go ahead and go to Google and look for font awesome CDN. Click on the first link that you see right here and copy the link tag. Paste it right above our CSS. As you can see, it's pretty long. We can break it into smaller parts though. So I can break it right here, go back and break it here as well. Now this looks better than before and it's shorter. In our body, let's go ahead and create a div with a class of counter wrapper. Inside this div, we're going to create another div with a class of counter container. And then in here, we need the 2 arrows and another div. So I'm going to start with the div and give it a class of counter background. We can also give it an ID of counter background later, so we can use it in our JavaScript. Background. Inside this div, we need to create an h1 element, so h1 with the class of counter value. This is going to be where we store our counter itself, and we can give it a 0 as the initial value. Below and above this div, we need to add our arrows. So to find those arrows that you've seen at the beginning of the video, these ones, we are using Font Awesome that we already linked. So we can go to fontawesome.com, click on the icons tab here, and then search angle up for the first arrow, select it, copy the I element here, paste it right above our div, and you can also copy it, like again, just change the class to from angle up to angle down, and that basically gives us the same thing. Let's go ahead and run our code and see what it looks like so far. You need this extension to open our HTML file and display it on our browser. It's available in the extension section here in VS Code. So you can go ahead and look for a live server and install it on your VS Code, and you'll be able to open this file by right clicking and then choosing live server. Now this is what we have so far. let's go ahead and give an ID to our angle up arrow, ID of arrow up. Let's do the same to this one too, an ID of arrow down. And let's also add an ID to our h1 element. Let's call it counter value. And this is all we're gonna need in our HTML. So let's go ahead and go to our CSS. In here, we're going to import a Google font first. So to do that, go ahead and go to fonts.google. And I'll be using this font in our project, so Poppins. If you don't see it, you can go to this search bar and type Poppins. It's going to be the first font that you see. Click on that, and you can choose as many styles as you like. Just add a style to your font. Go ahead and click on this plus icon. When you're done choosing all your styles, click on this icon right here, and you'll be able to see all the styles that you choose for your font. And you can link this font in your HTML file, or you can use the import rule in your CSS. That's what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and copy the import rule and paste it right here. Now style CSS. Now let's go ahead and style our body selector. So body. And the first thing that we're going to do is give it a height of 100 VH, 100 viewport height. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So save, nothing changed, but I want to get rid of this scroll bars. To do that, let's go ahead and use the overflow property, overflow hidden, and now we shouldn't be able to see that anymore. Let's center everything in our body basically. So display flex, center. Let's go ahead and do justify content center on the main axis. And then align items center on our cross axis, and that should center pretty much everything in the center. And now let's go ahead and style our counter wrapper. Let's add a width of 380 pixels, a height of 450 pixels, and a background color of F5. We also need to add a border radius to it, so border radius 50 pixels, and a box shadow, 9 pixels on the X offset, 9 pixels on the Y offset, and 19 pixels of blur radius. We also need to give it a color of C0, 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 5E. Now let's go ahead and save it and see what it did. Now as you can see, it added the border radius and also the box shadow here, but our items were not in the center, so we need to use flex blocks to do that. So display flex and justify content center, align items center. Now let's go ahead and save and see what it did. Now it's pretty much in the center as well. And now we can style our counter container. Let's give it a width of 334 pixels, a height of 404 pixels. Let's give it a background color of FFFFF 6 times. And then we need to save and see what it did. Let's go ahead and center everything in the middle. So display flex, justify content center, align items center. And we need to change the flex direction to column basically. Now everything is in a row. So we can do that, flex direction to column. And now that looks pretty nice. Let's go ahead and style our counter background as well. Let's give it a width of 174 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. Let's give it a background color of hashtag 211D1D. Let's go ahead and save and see what it did. Now we have this div. We give it a height and width, and it also has a background color. Let's add a border radius to it of 50 pixels. Going to save that. But you see our H1 is not in the middle, so we need to use flexbox again. Display flex. Then justify content center. And then align items center. Now it's in the center. But as you can see, we repeated so many properties like the display flex property and justify content and all of these flexbox properties, but we don't need to repeat it as often as we have. We can just group all these containers and just give them just one display flex and one justify content center. So this is what we're going to do right here. Let's use the first one, counter wrapper, comma, and then let's go to the counter container, and then a comma, and then a counter paragon. Okay, so what do they have in common? So they have the flexbox property in common. So there's 1, 2, 3 of them. So we can do that. So display flex. Okay. And then they also have justify content to center, and then align items to center. And they also have a border radius in common as well. So they have all this border radius of 50 pixels. Now let's give it a border radius of 50 pixels. Okay. Now we can delete all these properties basically so they don't take that as many space as they have. We're going to leave the flex direction to this one because that's the only property that it has on its own. And then let's delete this one. Now we have less code, pretty much everything the same. So that's normally how you would group stuff together and put them like in this kind of group and give them all the properties they have in common. And now let's go ahead and install our H1. So we call it counter value. Let's give it a font size of 5M. Let's give it a color of FFFFFF. And let's go ahead and save that. The arrows are smaller than the rest of the items basically. So we can go to our HTML file and increase the size. They have this built-in class that you can use to increase the size of the icons. So it's FA6X, FA-6X, and then we can add the same class to this one as well, FA 6 times. And now they're bigger and they stand out. They're not smaller than the rest of the content basically anymore. So let's go back to our CSS and add styles to our arrows. So the arrows have this built-in classes that they came with. That's what we're going to use. We don't have to code new classes. So the first one is going to be the angle up arrow. So FA angle up. Let's give it a color of hashtag 14C38E. That's going to be the green color. Now it has a green color. And then let's do the same to our angle down arrow. Angle down. Let's give it a color of E954, E95454. And that's the red color you can see right here. We also want to add that little movement that you guys have seen at the beginning of the video, that whenever we click on these arrows, they have that up and down movement. Let me show you what I mean. So whenever we click on this, they have like this transformation effect that makes it like go up and down. To do that, we need to add each of these arrows an active pseudo class. So let's go ahead and do FA angle up and add an active pseudo class to it. And then let's use the transform property, transform, and then translate on the x-axis 2%. I didn't mean 20%. And now on the y-axis, let's do the 2% as well. We also need to scale it a little bit, so we can use 0.9. Let's go ahead and save that and see if it works. Okay, it works. We can copy this and do the same to our angle down arrow. Let's go ahead and do that. Just change this up to down. And now, as you can see, it works, and both of them work. Whenever you click on this angle down arrow many times, you can see it highlights our H1, which we don't want to do that. So in order to disable that effect, we can go to our H1 section and just use user select to none. So now whenever we click on this many times, it won't select it at all. But that's what I forgot. So now let's go to our JavaScript file. Let's go ahead and make sure our JavaScript is also included in our HTML. So if it's not, go ahead and type script, which is the one with the source, and we call our JavaScript file script.js. And now we can go to our JavaScript file. And here in JavaScript, we need to call all these elements that we give an ID to, so we can use them in our code. So the first one we're going to do is, the first one we're going to need is going to be angle up arrow. So arrow up. Let's say that's equals to document.getElement by ID. And we called it arrow up. And let's get the second one, arrow down is what we're going to call it, document.getElement by ID. And we call this one arrow down. Then let's get our counter value, which is our H1 counter value, which equals to document.getElement by ID. And we give it an ID of counter value in our HTML file. And now let's get our background container, this one here, so we can change it whenever we click on these arrows, depending on the value of our counters. If it's positive, we're going to change it to green. If it's negative, we're going to change it to red. So let's call it counter PG. I'm going to make it bigger, and then document.getElement by ID. Let's give it a, it had an ID of counter background, and then semicolon, and let's declare a counter variable, and let's give it an initial value of 0. This is going to be our counter, so whenever we click on these arrows, it's going to increase or decrease depending on which one we click. And now the second thing that we're going to do is basically to check if we clicked one of the arrows. So to do that, let's go ahead and get our arrows, arrow up, and let's add an event listener to it. Event listeners takes an event and a function. So the event is going to be a click, and then let's call off, and then let's get our function right here, and we can put the code that we want to execute whenever we click on this angle up arrow. The first thing is going to be we want to add one number to our counter. The second thing is we want to assign our H1 to whatever our counter is. So we want this to show whatever value the counter is. To do that, let's go to counter value dot text content, and then that's going to be equal to the counter. So if it's 5, it's going to show 5. If it's 0, it's going to show 0. Let's do the same to our angle down arrow. So just change this to down, and we want the same to happen. Let's see if anything works. Okay, it works now, but it was supposed to be negative, so we forgot to change this to subtract 1. So let's go ahead and do that. It adds 1, subtracts 1. Okay, that works great. And now let's go ahead and code a function to change our code whenever we click on these arrows. So let's call it change color. And then we want to get the element that we want to change the color of. So that's going to be our counter background, and we give it a we called this one counter PG. Let's add a style to it, and then the property is going to be a background color that we want to change. And I'm going to use a ternary operator because it's shorter, it's easier. So the first one is going to be the condition. The condition is going to be if counter is equals to or greater than 1. So it's going to be if it's greater or equal to 1, we want this to happen. So we want to change the background color to this color that we used for our green arrow. It was hashtag. Let me go ahead and copy from here. Actually, it's way easier. And we need to put like quotes in our color because it won't recognize it. And then if it's not true, we want to add another condition and see if also counter is less than 0. If it's less than 0, we want it to check if it's less than 0. If it is, then we want to change the color to this red color. We'll also copy this and then put the code for the color right there. And then these two conditions, it's going to check if it's positive number, if it's negative number, and it's going to change the color to green if it's positive. If it's negative, it's going to change to this red color. But we want to add another condition as the last condition. You can add as many conditions as you want to a ternary operator. So this time we're going to see if it's either of those, if it's none of those, if it's not a positive number, if it's less than 0, then we want to change the color to the black color that we have right here. Let's go ahead and copy that. And then let's put quotes in it. I'm going to increase this so you can see the whole code. And now let's go ahead and save it. Nothing happens because we didn't call the function yet. We need to call this function in each arrow. So let's say change color. And then let's do the same in here as well, change color. And now let's see if it works. Now it works. The background color of our container changes depending on the value. So if it's positive, change to green, negative, red. If it's 0, if it's 0, it didn't work. So let's see what is going on here. If counter is greater equal to 1, we want to change to this condition. If it's less than 0, we want to change this. And if not, oh, I got the semicolon in there. That's probably why. Okay. So I realized we had the semicolon in there. That's probably one of the reasons why it didn't work. So yeah, let's go ahead and save this. And now it works. Like if it's 0, it changes to black. If it's negative, red. If it's positive, green. And now everything works. That's going to be at the end of the video. I will see you guys in the next video.